there's a quiet transformation happening behind the glow of screens, one that isn't often spoken about in open conversations, but has been reshaping the way people think, feel, and connect for decades now. In the late years of the 20th century, the internet began as a curiosity, a tool for exchanging ideas and accessing information. But like all powerful inventions, its effects reached far beyond its original intention. As years passed and digital networks expanded, so too did the presence of adult content online. What began as restricted access behind closed doors or printed material hidden away in drawers has evolved into an endless, unfiltered stream of graphic stimulation that can be accessed at any moment, from any device, by anyone who seeks it. This isn't just a matter of cultural permissiveness or shifting moral values. What's happening now is far more significant. Since the late 1990s, the steady growth of adult content consumption has gone hand in hand with the evolution of internet technology. More bandwidth, more devices, more convenience. And with each advancement, more people turn to screens, not only for work or entertainment, but for intimate gratification. In recent years, especially during periods of global isolation when people turned inward, usage of explicit material online exploded. Some of the most visited websites in the world today aren't dedicated to education or communication, but to serving up sexual imagery in endless, easily digestible forms. These platforms aren't just popular, they dominate internet traffic. Combined, the world's adult websites now attract more visitors than some of the most powerful online marketplaces and social networks. And this isn't happening on the margins of society. It's mainstream, embedded, quietly influencing how people understand desire, how they perceive bodies, and how they interact in their private lives. But the more attention researchers give to this pattern, the clearer it becomes that it's not a neutral or harmless development. Beneath the surface, a crisis is unfolding, one that's beginning to show its impact on physical health, mental stability, and emotional well-being. In the same time frame that saw the rise of digital adult material, another trend emerged. Less discussed, but just as alarming. Young men, many in their 20s or even younger, began reporting difficulties that were once largely confined to aging populations. Problems with sexual performance, a lack of desire, an inability to maintain arousal during physical intimacy. These weren't isolated complaints. They appeared across countries, cultures, and demographics. And the numbers have been rising steadily, leading many scientists and therapists to question whether these two patterns, so seemingly unrelated on the surface, are actually part of the same phenomenon. To understand how something viewed through a screen could affect a person's intimate life, you have to look inside the human brain. There's a chemical messenger called dopamine, tiny in structure but massive in influence, that plays a vital role in how people experience reward, motivation, and pleasure. When you eat something delicious, win a game, fall in love, or feel desired, dopamine is released. It's part of what drives humans to seek out experiences that ensure survival and connection. But the system wasn't designed for overstimulation. It evolved in a world where novelty was rare, where sexual encounters were rooted in human closeness, not digital pixels. The internet changes that equation completely. Instead of occasional and meaningful experiences, users are bombarded with unlimited variation. Different appearances, scenarios, intensities, each video or image more provocative than the last. The brain, faced with this avalanche of novelty, responds with wave after wave of dopamine. But the problem is, dopamine isn't just about pleasure, it's about craving. The more you feed it, the more it demands. Over time, the pleasure decreases, but the urge remains. This disconnect can create a cycle where individuals continue to seek out more content, more intensity, more hours, even though the satisfaction continues to shrink. This process doesn't just affect mood, it physically reshapes how the brain works. Areas responsible for judgment, impulse control, emotional regulation, and sexual reward begin to adapt to this constant flood of stimulation. One part of the brain in particular, associated with desire and anticipation, has been shown in scientific studies to expand in response to frequent adult content consumption. But this isn't a positive growth. It's a kind of overstimulation that rewires how someone thinks about pleasure and makes it harder to control impulses in other areas of life as well. It becomes not just a habit, but a way the brain expects to operate. And when this new wiring becomes the default, consequences follow. What once felt exciting becomes dull. What used to be enough is now boring. This leads some individuals to chase more extreme content or spend longer periods trying to recapture the thrill that once came so easily. For many, this becomes the start of a silent dependency. They're not using adult content because they enjoy it anymore. They're using it because it's become a coping mechanism, a distraction, or simply a reflex. Like a loop they can't exit, even if they want to. And many do want to. But trying to stop often reveals just how deep the pattern has sunk. People might uninstall apps, delete search histories, or set timers to reduce their usage. But again and again, they return. Not always because of intense desire, but because of emotional discomfort, anxiety, sadness, restlessness. The content becomes a way to escape feelings that are difficult to confront directly. And because it offers immediate relief, even if only temporary, the brain learns to use it as a shortcut to emotional regulation. But shortcuts come at a cost. Over time, people who engage in heavy adult content consumption may notice more than just a dip in physical intimacy. They may begin to feel emotionally flattened, less excited by things they used to enjoy, more irritable, more disconnected from those around them. Friendships suffer, ambitions fade, self-confidence erodes. And it often happens slowly enough that it goes unnoticed until something significant forces reflection. A failed relationship, a breakdown in motivation, or a sudden realization that large portions of life have been handed over to a screen. This isn't about moral judgment. It's about understanding a new and powerful force that's interacting with the brain in ways we're only beginning to fully comprehend. For many people, the material they consume online becomes more than just entertainment. It becomes a teacher, shaping how they view relationships, expectations, vulnerability, and consent. And when those lessons are delivered through curated, exaggerated, and often unrealistic depictions of intimacy, the damage can be profound. Real-life encounters can begin to feel awkward, slow, or inadequate. Emotional closeness may seem foreign or even frightening. And the depth of human connection gets replaced by the illusion of connection provided by a screen. This disconnect is especially powerful in younger individuals whose understanding of relationships and desire is still forming. When children and teenagers are exposed to this content early, often long before they understand the emotional depth of intimacy, it can lay down patterns that shape how they relate to others for the rest of their lives. They learn not from experience, but from repetition, from pixels, not people, from scenarios that prioritize performance over tenderness. The result? A generation that may struggle to build authentic bonds, not out of apathy, but because they've been wired to expect something else entirely. The implications reach far beyond the bedroom. Motivation itself can begin to decline. The drive to pursue challenging goals, to delay gratification, to invest in long-term success. All of these rely on the ability to manage impulses and tolerate discomfort. But when the brain becomes used to immediate and powerful rewards at the press of a button, patience becomes harder, boredom becomes intolerable, and work that doesn't offer instant satisfaction starts to feel unbearable. It's not laziness, it's a change in how the brain processes effort and reward. This pattern can also isolate people. Not necessarily in a physical sense, though that happens too, but emotionally. When real connection feels less rewarding than digital fantasy, when conversations seem exhausting and relationships feel like too much effort, people retreat. They don't stop caring about others. They just lose the momentum to show it. Texts go unanswered. Invitations are ignored. And slowly, the ties that keep people grounded in community and purpose begin to unravel. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of this shift is that so many who are caught in it blame themselves. They assume they are weak, flawed, or broken. But what they're experiencing is not a moral failing. It's a technological storm colliding with biological vulnerability. The human brain wasn't built for this level of stimulation, this degree of novelty, this constant accessibility. It's doing what it's designed to do, responding to pleasure, seeking rewards, avoiding pain. But in an environment flooded with supercharged stimuli, those instincts can lead people away from fulfillment and toward frustration. Even those who don't believe they have a problem may begin to notice subtle changes. A restless mind, a sense of numbness, a shift in how time is spent, in what brings joy, in how deeply they feel. These aren't signs of weakness. They're signals that something deeper is happening. And while breaking the cycle isn't easy, it's not impossible. But it starts with understanding what's really going on. This isn't a rare problem. Studies across continents, from Asia to the Americas, show that a significant portion of the population engages regularly with explicit content. And among them, many feel conflicted. They enjoy it, but they also feel drained by it. They use it to relax, but find themselves more anxious afterward. They tell themselves they can stop, but often don't. And they carry that contradiction silently, ashamed to admit it, afraid to ask for help. In silence, the mind often becomes the loudest thing in the room. For those caught in the growing grip of compulsive digital gratification, this silence can be haunting. It's not just the presence of the content that shapes behavior, it's the absence of anything else that competes. When someone wakes up with a fog they can't explain, loses interest in tasks that once mattered, or stares at a phone with the intention of doing something productive, only to find themselves again drawn into the familiar spiral. They begin to sense a fracture forming beneath the surface. And yet, they keep returning. Not because it feels good, but because it feels necessary. Because the space without it feels unbearable. One of the most misunderstood elements of this entire issue is that the compulsion is not necessarily about desire. It's about regulation, emotional regulation, psychological management. Life, for all its beauty, is not easy. People endure disappointment, pressure, shame, uncertainty, loneliness. The brain, in trying to shield itself from pain, often leans toward comfort-seeking behaviors. But when comfort comes in the form of highly stimulating, artificially constructed fantasy, it trains the brain to seek dopamine rather than resolution. This is the trap. The more you numb the discomfort without addressing the root, the more intense the need becomes. This is where many well-meaning people fall into misunderstanding. They assume that frequent consumption of adult content is always about lust or a lack of discipline. But the data and the personal stories tell a different tale. Many people who overuse this material describe it not as an act of pleasure, but as a way to cope. With grief, with rejection, with failure, with fear. But they don't come away soothed. They come away empty. And that emptiness demands to be filled again. So the cycle repeats. Modern content is built to reinforce this cycle. Algorithms are not designed for your well-being. They are built to hold your attention. They learn what you click, how long you linger, what you scroll past, what you rewind. And based on those patterns, they serve up more of what will keep your eyes locked to the screen. Over time, the content becomes more tailored, more addictive, more intense. It rewards impulsivity and punishes restraint. Every moment you resist is met with the knowledge that something more novel is just one search away. And in the face of infinite novelty, restraint starts to look irrational. In such a digital environment, time becomes distorted. Hours disappear. The body might remain still, but the brain is on a roller coaster. Constant spikes of arousal, anticipation, disappointment, satisfaction, regret. This roller coaster is exhausting. And the toll is not just cognitive, it's hormonal, neurological, even spiritual. People start feeling detached from their own experience. They stop trusting their instincts. They lose the ability to differentiate between what they want and what they've been trained to want. What's even more startling is the level of normalization. Society doesn't just tolerate the presence of this content, it markets it. It disguises it in advertisements, leaks it into social media feeds, turns it into humor, and uses it as a sales tactic. There's no clear line anymore. What used to be adult only is now a click away from the casual scroll. This environment makes it difficult for people to even recognize the scope of their behavior, let alone confront it. It's hard to fix a problem that's been camouflaged as entertainment. Even when someone becomes aware of the toll it's taking, the path forward is difficult. The brain, now used to a steady supply of hyperstimulation, resists moderation. The first days without access can feel unbearable, like a fog lifting only to reveal anxiety, boredom, irritability. These symptoms are not imaginary. They're withdrawal. And withdrawal doesn't just test willpower, it tests identity. Many people who try to cut back find themselves wrestling not only with urges, but with a profound sense of confusion. Who am I without this habit? What do I actually enjoy? What fills my time now? This internal crisis is often compounded by guilt. The feeling that something so seemingly trivial could hold so much power can make people feel foolish or ashamed. They hide the struggle. They don't seek support. They pretend everything's fine. And in that isolation, the habit gains strength. But the truth is, this is not a moral failure. It's a perfect storm, a collision between vulnerable brains, clever machines, and a cultural landscape that has stopped asking hard questions about what kind of intimacy we're encouraging people to seek. The body pays a price, too. One of the most well-documented consequences of chronic digital arousal is a growing difficulty with physical intimacy. When someone's primary sexual stimuli are fictional, detached, and enhanced by digital editing, the real becomes unrecognizable. Many report that touch no longer evokes the same spark, that faces, voices, and presence, once enough to stir excitement, now feel muted. And it's not just a matter of expectation, it's biology. The nervous system becomes conditioned to require constant novelty, specific visual cues, or exaggerated scenarios to become aroused. The ordinary, in comparison, no longer satisfies. This isn't an abstract theory. It's backed by multiple studies across different regions and age groups. Surveys show a dramatic increase in sexual dysfunction among men under 40. Conditions once linked to aging, low desire, performance struggles, disconnection, are showing up in people just beginning their adult lives. Therapists and physicians are seeing a rise in patients who, despite being physically healthy, report difficulty with sexual activity, particularly when it involves emotional closeness. The common thread in many of these cases? A long history of heavy digital stimulation. And it's not only about what happens in bed. These changes affect emotional expression. They influence how people give and receive affection. They dull the natural feedback loops that allow us to feel intimacy as a shared experience. Over time, some begin to avoid relationships altogether. Not because they don't want love, but because love feels exhausting. The vulnerability, the compromise, the work required to build trust, all of it pales in comparison to the ease and control of fantasy. Real people are messy. Screens are predictable. This avoidance often leads to loneliness. Not the kind that comes from being alone for an afternoon, but a deep, chronic feeling of a disconnection. People might be surrounded by friends, engaged in conversations, even admired publicly, but inside they feel unknown. They don't share their struggles. They fear being judged. They smile while quietly wondering if they're the only ones who feel this way. And in this loneliness, they seek comfort. And the comfort they've come to know is digital. The irony is cruel. The very tool used to escape isolation becomes the thing that deepens it. And with every return to that tool, the ability to find satisfaction elsewhere shrinks. This is why telling someone to just quit is often ineffective. It's not about quitting a behavior, it's about rebuilding a sense of meaning, relearning what joy feels like without stimulation, rediscovering purpose without a dopamine hit. And this is no small task. Still, it can be done. Change begins with honesty, with acknowledging the scope of the influence, without shame or denial. It begins with questions, not judgments. When did this habit begin? What need does it fill? What emotions surround it? What parts of life have quietly eroded under its weight? These questions don't offer quick solutions, but they open the door. They create space for choice, for intention, for healing. For some, the path forward involves therapy, especially approaches that help rewire thought patterns, like cognitive behavioral therapy. For others, it starts with creating distance from triggers, changing routines, limiting screen exposure, seeking out alternative forms of connection. For many, community plays a vital role. Just knowing you're not alone, that others are navigating the same terrain, can be powerful. It breaks the silence. It challenges the illusion that the struggle is unique or shameful. It's also important to remember that progress isn't linear. There will be setbacks, moments of weakness, days when old patterns resurface. But these moments don't erase the effort. They are part of the process. Recovery isn't about never struggling. It's about becoming resilient, about learning to respond to pain with presence instead of escape, about building a life so full of meaning that the need for distraction fades. What we're facing isn't just a personal issue, it's a cultural one. We have created a world where stimulation is cheap, fast, and endless. But connection is fragile. where pleasure is sold but fulfillment is elusive, where people are taught to pursue satisfaction in isolation instead of intimacy. And the consequences of that worldview are beginning to surface. In clinics, in bedrooms, in classrooms, in the silent corners of homes where someone sits, lit only by the glow of a screen, wondering why they feel so hollow. This story is still being written. The science is still evolving. But the patterns are clear. Something has shifted. And while the internet isn't going away, neither is the human need for love, depth, and authenticity. The challenge ahead isn't just about controlling behavior. It's about redefining connection. It's about choosing presence over performance, courage over comfort, and meaning over momentary relief. This is not an easy path, but it is a necessary one, because the alternative, continuing to drift further from ourselves and each other, is far more costly. The cost is not just personal, it's collective. A society that loses its ability to bond, to be vulnerable, to feel deeply, is a society that loses its soul. And so the question is not whether this pattern is harmful. The question is whether we are willing to do the hard work of changing it. Across the globe, in different languages and cultural frameworks, a quiet epidemic is forming, one that doesn't leave obvious scars on the surface, but leaves deep marks within the mind. A digital habit that began for many as innocent curiosity is gradually revealing itself to be more insidious than anyone anticipated. It's not simply that people are watching more explicit content. It's that their brains, relationships, and perceptions of themselves are being slowly altered by it. And perhaps what's most concerning is how few recognize the full scope of what's being lost. There is something fundamentally human about shared intimacy. A glance, a touch, a vulnerable confession. These are the threads that hold emotional life together. But when intimacy is rehearsed through screens instead of experiences, those threads weaken. What was once spontaneous becomes awkward. What used to feel natural begins to feel scripted. People raised with constant access to provocative material don't simply grow desensitized, they grow disconnected. From others, from their own desires, from the slow, unpredictable rhythm of authentic connection. This shift often begins early, sometimes even in adolescence. The moment when a young person first encounters content meant for adults has grown younger with each passing year. What was once accidental exposure through a discarded magazine is now often just a matter of mistyped searches, shared links, or poorly monitored devices. And once the door opens, it rarely closes. The adolescent brain, still developing, still sensitive to patterns and repetition, begins to anchor its expectations on fantasy rather than reality. The notion of sex becomes performance. Desire becomes a reaction to imagery, not interaction. Over time, these early imprints shape what that young person seeks, what they avoid, and how they measure their own worth. That measurement often becomes cruel. In a landscape where beauty is airbrushed, bodies are sculpted, and every encounter is edited for maximum appeal, the average person begins to feel increasingly inadequate. Real skin doesn't glow like studio lighting. Real chemistry isn't always immediate. Real desire doesn't follow a script. Yet, when digital perfection is the model, actual experiences pale in comparison. This leads many individuals, not just men, but women as well, to internalize a belief that they are not enough. That their bodies, their personalities, their attempts at connection are somehow defective. This self-doubt often festers quietly, hidden beneath a public face that says everything is fine. but everything is not fine. In private, many struggle. They feel a sense of dissatisfaction that follows them like a shadow. Even when life looks successful on the outside, something feels missing on the inside. That something is often presence. People can be surrounded by laughter, by friendship, by opportunity, but still feel like observers in their own lives. And the more time they spend turning to their devices for gratification, the more those moments of real connection feel foreign. Intimacy becomes a memory, not a practice. In this void, emotional distress can flourish. Anxiety doesn't always shout, it often whispers. It hides behind restlessness, behind a sudden need to check notifications, behind an unexplained sadness that arrives in the quiet hours. Depression, too, can take root. Not always the dramatic kind, but the slow erosion of joy, the thinning of curiosity, the dulling of the world's color. Many who overuse explicit material report not only physical fatigue, but emotional exhaustion. The content they turn to for relief often leaves them feeling more isolated than before. This disconnection has real-world consequences. It affects academic performance, professional motivation, athletic ambition, creative drive. Because all of these pursuits require sustained effort, delayed gratification, and a tolerance for discomfort. But when the brain is conditioned to expect immediate reward with minimal effort, these qualities weaken. People begin to lose patience with challenge. They seek shortcuts, and when shortcuts fail, they retreat. Over time, goals are abandoned, not because they weren't possible, but because they no longer felt worth the wait. And when connection to others weakens, the human need for belonging doesn't vanish. It simply becomes harder to satisfy. The desire to be seen, to be understood, to be loved, remains powerful. But when someone no longer believes they are lovable, they begin to pull away. This withdrawal often shows up in subtle ways: declining invitations, ending conversations early, ghosting people they once enjoyed. They may not consciously think they're isolating, but little by little, they disappear from the lives of others. And in that isolation, the reliance on digital comfort grows stronger. The shame that accompanies this pattern is profound, because despite its reach, it remains a taboo topic. People joke about it. They reference it in passing. But deep conversations? Rare. This silence creates a distorted perception. Many believe they are alone in their struggle, when in reality, millions face the same battle. But shame thrives in secrecy. It convinces people that their habits are unique, their weakness special. That if anyone truly knew, they'd be judged or rejected. And so they stay silent, carrying a burden that grows heavier with time. This silence extends into relationships as well. Partners begin to sense distance. Physical intimacy fades. Affection becomes mechanical or disappears entirely. And because the topic is so difficult to address, many couples avoid it. They fight about other things: chores, timing, tone of voice, never naming the actual source of their growing estrangement. And without intervention, that estrangement can lead to resentment, mistrust, and eventual collapse. Not because love wasn't present, but because the connection was slowly starved of oxygen. Parents, too, often remain in the dark. Many assume that discussing such topics with children or teens is inappropriate or unnecessary. They trust filters or rely on schools to provide education. But silence doesn't protect. It leaves young minds to navigate complex material alone. And in that vacuum, misinformation spreads. Children learn about sex not through healthy modeling or open dialogue, but through scripted performances. They don't learn about consent, respect, or emotional safety. They learn about control, performance, and consumption. And those lessons stay with them into adulthood. Educational systems, by and large, have yet to fully address the depth of this issue. While some programs offer surface-level discussions about online safety or anatomy, few dive into the psychological consequences of early and repeated exposure to graphic material. Few teach students how to develop healthy coping mechanisms, how to process desire without shame, or how to distinguish fantasy from reality. And without that guidance, students are left vulnerable, not just to exposure, but to confusion, guilt, and long-term dependency. Even those in leadership or positions of influence are not immune. From politicians to athletes to creators, stories surface regularly of careers derailed or personal lives unraveling due to habits that spiraled out of control. Yet rarely do these moments lead to deeper public conversations. They are treated as scandals, not symptoms. The message, once again, becomes, hide your struggle. Fix it alone. Don't talk about it. And so the cycle continues. But it doesn't have to. There is a growing movement, a quiet but persistent effort among mental health professionals, educators, parents, and individuals themselves to reframe this conversation, to move it from a place of judgment to one of compassion, to recognize that this isn't just a moral issue or a matter of willpower. It's a public health challenge, one that affects mental resilience, emotional intelligence, and the capacity for human connection. This movement doesn't seek to shame or ban. It seeks to inform, to equip, to empower, to give people tools to understand their patterns, to challenge their assumptions, to rebuild their sense of agency. It encourages curiosity over condemnation, questions over commands. What triggers this habit? What needs are being unmet? What would life look like with more presence, more purpose, more authentic connection? One of the most powerful steps a person can take is simply to notice, not to act immediately, not to judge, but to pay attention, to observe the patterns, the time of day, the emotions that come before, the feelings that follow. This awareness is the seed of change. It reveals the automatic behaviors. It illuminates the deeper wounds. And once you see clearly, you can begin to choose differently. For some, this choice means seeking professional guidance. For others, it's about building new habits, spending more time in nature, reconnecting with old friends, taking up physical activity, or exploring creativity. It's not about distraction. It's about realignment, filling life with things that satisfy on a deeper level, reclaiming time, reclaiming joy, reclaiming agency. This journey is not linear. There will be moments of doubt, days of relapse, times when the old patterns feel safer than the new. But every choice, every pause, every act of awareness is a step forward. Recovery is not a destination. It's a series of decisions. It's learning how to sit with discomfort, how to tolerate boredom, how to find beauty in the ordinary again. And perhaps most importantly, it's learning how to love oneself through the process. To forgive the moments of weakness, to celebrate the smallest victories, to recognize that growth is often invisible before it becomes undeniable. That the work being done in silence, in solitude, in stillness, is the foundation of transformation. This is the work of reclaiming a mind, of restoring a heart, of remembering what it means to be human, not just to feel pleasure, but to feel deeply, not just to chase excitement, but to cultivate peace, not just to survive, but to live fully. And in a world that often offers distraction as a solution, choosing presence is an act of rebellion, a radical, beautiful, necessary rebellion. There is a distinct kind of freedom that comes not from having everything you want at your fingertips, but from learning how to live without needing everything all at once. In a world engineered to deliver pleasure instantly, it's easy to confuse freedom with access, and harder to recognize when access becomes a chain. This is especially true with compulsive digital habits, especially those wrapped in the cloak of privacy, normalized consumption, and cultural silence. When the very act of seeking momentary relief begins to hollow out long-term satisfaction, the pleasure becomes performative, and fulfillment remains elusive. Many people never imagined they would fall into such patterns. It often starts innocently, as curiosity, as something to explore during a period of boredom or loneliness. But repeated exposure to highly stimulating, constantly novel, hyper-visual experiences slowly reshapes what the brain learns to anticipate and seek out. Where once touch, laughter, scent, and subtle energy between two people stirred affection, now it may take only a few minutes of scrolling carefully curated thumbnails to override those natural instincts. This is not a matter of choice anymore. It becomes conditioning, deep neurological conditioning. Over time, the inputs begin to replace the internal compass. Dopamine, once a helpful messenger of motivation and anticipation, becomes tangled in a loop of chase and crash. The desire builds, but satisfaction grows more fleeting. In the space where satisfaction once lived, discomfort moves in. Anxiety, self-doubt, mental fatigue. And rather than resolving those feelings through rest, conversation, or introspection, many seek the same source that caused the discomfort in the first place: the digital fix, the next clip, the endless scroll. And so life begins to shrink. Not visibly at first. Careers continue, meals are eaten, appointments kept. But emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, the terrain becomes barren. That which once lit up the inner landscape grows dim. A child's laughter doesn't echo the same way. The accomplishment of hard work doesn't linger. The sound of rain, the feeling of sun on skin, the long gaze of someone who truly sees you, all of it seems dulled. The world hasn't lost its beauty. You've just lost your ability to hear it. And because this erosion is slow, most people don't recognize it until they look back and see how far they've drifted. Weeks, months, years may pass before someone realizes that what they were seeking all along wasn't intensity, it was connection. Not stimulation, but significance. Not volume, but meaning. And once this realization arrives, it's often accompanied by grief. Grief for the time spent numbing. Grief for the relationships that grew distant. Grief for the version of oneself that used to feel alive. But grief is not the end. In fact, it is often the beginning. It's the emotional spark that ignites a deeper longing. Not for fantasy, but for reality. Not for escape, but for re-entry into the human experience. And this longing, fragile as it may feel at first, is powerful. It can be the very thing that moves someone from cycles of shame into acts of self-respect, from secrecy into truth, from passive survival into intentional living. The process of rebuilding does not begin with quitting something. It begins with understanding it, naming the trigger, exploring the wound, asking the question, what pain was I trying to outrun? What fear was I trying to silence? For some, the answer might lie in trauma. For others, in neglect. For many, it lies in loneliness. The quiet ache of feeling invisible even in crowded rooms. The ache of not being held, not being chosen, not being known. These are deep, legitimate wounds. And pretending they don't exist only deepens their reach. True recovery is never just about abstinence. It's about nourishment, filling the void with something honest, even if it's messy. Learning to sit with discomfort instead of sedating it. Cultivating rituals that bring peace without price tags. Early walks, creative expression, heartfelt conversations. It's about building a life that doesn't require escape. That feels rich enough, whole enough, meaningful enough. That digital cravings no longer feel like lifelines. In that journey, setbacks will come. Days will arrive when the old patterns whisper louder than the new ones. When urges feel unbearable. When shame tries to claw its way back in. But these moments don't define the road. They test it. And with each test passed, even imperfectly, the foundation becomes stronger. Discipline becomes devotion. Resistance becomes resilience. And freedom, once elusive, becomes embodied. Support plays a vital role here. Not all healing must be solitary. In fact, some of the most transformative breakthroughs happen in the presence of another person, someone who listens without judgment, who reflects your humanity back to you when you've forgotten how to see it. Whether it's a therapist, a mentor, a group, or a friend, healing accelerates in honest connection. And it's through this connection that many rediscover what they were looking for all along, not pleasure, but presence. Not fantasy, but belonging. As society begins to awaken to the deeper implications of chronic digital overexposure, especially in the realm of sexual content, it faces a choice. It can continue to treat this topic as taboo, leaving millions to struggle in the shadows. Or it can bring it into the light. It can build frameworks of education, prevention, and support that empower individuals, not shame them. It can teach young people the value of slow intimacy, of emotional literacy, of recognizing desire not just as a biological urge, but as a path to deep union and trust. Parents must play a critical role in this transformation. Avoiding the conversation is no longer an option. Children are growing up with devices in hand before they've learned the meaning of vulnerability. Conversations about boundaries, values, and emotional safety need to start early and evolve with time. Not as lectures, but as ongoing dialogue. Not to scare, but to prepare. The goal is not to instill fear about sexuality, but to teach reverence for it. To place it within the sacred context of connection, responsibility, and joy. Institutions, too, must rise to the occasion. Schools, churches, workplaces, and media organizations must acknowledge the reality of this issue and respond with depth. That means going beyond surface-level messaging and addressing the psychological underpinnings of compulsive behavior. It means supporting mental health initiatives that include education on digital wellness, addiction psychology, and the neuroscience of reward systems. It means acknowledging that this is not a fringe issue. It is a mirror reflecting the inner lives of millions. Technology companies have a role as well. With the vast data they collect and the algorithms they design, they hold extraordinary power over user behavior. That power must be wielded with ethics, not just profit motives. User well-being must be prioritized in content delivery systems. Features that promote compulsive use must be redesigned. And users must be given tools, not only to filter content, but to understand its effects. Responsibility cannot be an afterthought. It must be built into the very architecture of the digital world. But perhaps the most important change begins at the individual level, in the quiet decision to reclaim one's attention, to remember that this life is not a series of images to be consumed, but a sacred unfolding to be lived. That the body is not a tool for conquest or escape, but a vessel for sensation, emotion, and connection. That pleasure is not something to be chased endlessly, but something to be savored slowly, in the arms of trust, in the rhythm of real time. Every person deserves the opportunity to wake up in their own life, to feel clarity instead of compulsion, to look in the mirror and see not a shameful habit, but a human being who has survived the confusion of a hyper-digital age and has chosen, one day at a time, to return to themselves. This choice, made again and again, is not small. It is revolutionary. And in that revolution lies hope. Hope that a generation can learn to live with technology without being consumed by it. Hope that intimacy can be reclaimed, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. Hope that love can once again be learned through experience, not scripts. Through awkward first kisses, not rehearsed scenarios. Through late-night conversations that stretch until morning, not swipes that vanish by sunrise. To feel again, to reach out again, to hope again. Because no matter how far someone may have wandered, the return is always possible. And it begins with a single, courageous choice: to turn toward the light, however dim, and keep walking.